Hello, 6th grade. Welcome to day 3 of e-learning. Hope things are going well for you guys so far. Today in reading, what we're going to do is talk about nonfiction writing. Specifically, this is just the introduction and the different types of nonfiction. So let's get into it. Now, what is nonfiction? I'm sure many of you already know this, but let's go over it just in case. Nonfiction has two parts to it. The prefix, non, and then the base word, fiction. As you know, when you put non in front of a word, it means not, and then whatever that word is. That word in this case is fiction, which refers to made-up stories. Stories like Harry Potter, Star Wars, anything that's not true is a fictional story. Put them together, and you get nonfiction, which means not made up. So basically, nonfiction writing is about true information. Alright, let's move on. Some things you should know before we get started with the different types of nonfiction. Nonfiction is written for one or more purposes. Now, I know this feels very obvious. Why would you write something if you didn't have a purpose? It's important for us, though, to make sure we understand what the author's purpose is, because if we don't, then we might not understand it exactly the way that they wanted us to. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. Nonfiction is how an author expresses their point of view. So, whenever we have something that we really care about in this real world, one great way for us to sort of share that point of view or that opinion is through nonfiction writing. You can tell what an author's point of view is by looking at their tone. All nonfiction is written with a certain tone or attitude. We'll talk about word choice a little bit later, and what we can sort of tell from word choice is how an author is feeling specifically about the topic which they discuss. If they use a lot of really positive, upbeat words about their topic, they're probably a fan. But if they use a lot of negative words, then they probably do not like that topic very much. Lastly, nonfiction is a way to develop or explain our ideas logically. Okay, let's move on. So, before we explain all that, which will come in a later lesson, let's talk about the three main types of nonfiction. To start off, you've got informative nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, and literary nonfiction. Informative nonfiction, you guessed it, gives information on a topic. So teachers will use informative nonfiction all the time because it's a great way for us to convey this information to you. Narrative nonfiction, perhaps you recognize narrative. It sounds a lot like narrator, which has to do with telling a story. Well, narrative nonfiction tells a true story. You'll see this a lot in memoirs or biographies. Sometimes some of the most famous pieces of nonfiction are those which tell about an author's real-life experience with something. Okay, and the last one, literary nonfiction. This one is the most difficult one to understand, I think. We won't touch on it a whole lot during this unit, but it's important to know about. Literary nonfiction uses language creatively. What I would say is this. Literary nonfiction is basically narrative nonfiction, but a little more interestingly written. So maybe it's more beautiful to read, maybe it is just simply more interesting to read. Literary nonfiction uses a lot of the same things that fictional stories do, but about a real story. We'll explain that a little bit more later. Don't worry if it's still a little confusing right now. So let's talk a little bit more about informative nonfiction. Remember, informative nonfiction simply gives us information on a topic. Here's an example. In the observable universe, there are an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. That's a very, very short piece of informative nonfiction. It's true, and you learn something from it. We find informative nonfiction in textbooks, oh man, all the time in textbooks, in articles, in how-to manuals, and many other different examples and different mediums. Let's talk about narrative nonfiction. So narrative nonfiction, remember, tells a true story. Here's an example from my life. Once, when I was running a cross-country race in high school, my shoe came off at the foot of a tall hill and I finished the race without it. Without the shoe, not without a foot. Yeah, that was an interesting race. It was one of the first ones I ever did as a freshman in high school. And so for the rest of the race, I was a little lopsided. I feel like I lost it near the beginning. So I was, a little impressed with myself at the end there. Anyway, we can find narrative nonfiction in blog posts, biographies, and comedy routines as well. Now, a lot of the narrative nonfiction and nonfiction in general that we'll talk about in reading class is going to be written down. But nonfiction exists anywhere that real, true information is being shared. So that's why I included comedy routines here. Often when a comedian is going to try to make the audience laugh, they tell a funny story about their life. Last one, literary nonfiction. So, literary nonfiction is writing that often tells a story in a very interesting, sometimes poetic way. It often seems like it's a fictional story right out of a novel, but where on the one hand you might be reading Harry Potter and it's very interesting and entertaining, you know that it's not true. But if you're reading a piece of literary nonfiction, it might also be interesting and entertaining, but you know it's true. So let's flip to the back of this slide and do a quick comparison. So here is a piece of regular narrative nonfiction. One Saturday, I made breakfast for my mom. I made coffee, toast with jam, and cereal. Now this is a story. It's just pretty short and frankly not that interesting. Now let's look at literary nonfiction, if we do a literary version of that story. One Saturday, I decided to be extra good. When she came out of the bedroom tying her robe, she yawned a hat-sized yawn and blinked red eyes at the weak brew of coffee I had fixed for her. I made her toast with strawberry jam spread to all the corners and set the three boxes of cereal in front of her. This is from Drive-In Movies by Gary Soto, which is a story that we're going to read a little bit later. As you can see, this example right here, though it's the same story as our regular narrative nonfiction, it's a little more interesting, a little more descriptive, and a little more entertaining. All right, let's flip back around. Some examples of literary nonfiction are memoirs, which are, those are sort of like autobiographies. It's when someone writes about a specific part of their life. Autobiographies are when someone writes about their whole life, and diaries actually are also literary nonfiction. They're true, but they include a lot of description usually, and a lot of the author's own thoughts on what's going on. Okay, now for your practice for this lesson, I would like you to either write at least 5 sentences of informative nonfiction about something you enjoy. Explain it to me as if I'd never heard of it, because maybe I haven't. I am of the firm belief that everybody is a nerd about something. It can be about a story, it can be about a sport, it can be about something in history, it can be anything. I'd like you to write at least 5 sentences telling me about something that you feel like you are a nerd about. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. Your other choice is to write at least 5 sentences of narrative nonfiction about an interesting thing that happened in your life. So maybe you also ran a cross-country race with only one shoe on. But think about something in your life that you would be willing to share with me and give me 5 sentences explaining that. Of course, if you would like to give me more than 5 sentences, that's great, but 5 sentences is a basic, good paragraph. Alright, excellent work. I'm excited to read all of your paragraphs. We have reached the end of our lesson. So, as you may have read in Google Classroom, we are going to be, for the rest of the week, so for tomorrow, I'm not going to give you another assignment. Instead, I'm going to have you catch up on any assignments you haven't been able to finish yet, and I would also like you to know that all of the assignments are due at the end of the day Friday, like 11:59 p.m. Now, I would not recommend you save everything until Friday to do, but I know that this is all very new, we're all trying to figure it out, and some of you guys might need some more time. I need some more time as well, so that's why I'm giving you this day tomorrow. Alright, I hope we can see each other in the future soon, but until next time, have a good rest of your day.